when I have this opportunity, I always raise 3 topics. One, I always ask, are you registered to vote? And I want to see hands. Yes. Okay, very good. How many of you voted November the 2nd? And I know that's not that easy, so it's not if you're here and you're registered, and I understand local election. But I want to make this point very, very clear. If the future is going to be what you can look back when you're my age and be proud, it will be because young people get involved in the process. You have to understand that you look at issues in general different than I look at them in general. I mean, Social Security is not going to go away in my lifetime. It may be gone long before you reach that age, simply because if there's not significant things done, it'll be gone. It'll be unfunded. Climate change. Your whole future is going to be impacted by whether we are responsible or not. I won't get into details on what that should be, but you got to be deciding elections, which means that you need to not just vote, you got to get involved in the process and get your peers to vote, so that you start determining elections. And when you start determining elections, then people running for office, they'll want to talk to you. And when I say you, your peers, the younger generation. But right now, you don't decide elections very often. And so your impact is very limited. Secondly, I want to tell you that, I know you're seniors, so it's a little late to tell you it's important that you really learn, but you'll have to continue. So my point of, you got to be a learner for life. The life you live is it's going to change so many times. You'll be outdated before you know it if you're not learning consistently. So be a learner. Even if you're kind of recovering from not being that serious a learner here at K-State, there's never too late to suddenly get serious about constantly learning. The third thing I want to share with you is you've had a little opportunity to get into what we call civic engagement. And I just want to make it clear to you, as you go out into the real world, the communities in which you live are going to be heavily dependent upon citizens willing to participate in what's going on. It's not just a matter of voting and electing the school board and the county commission, the city commission. They need help. They need citizens engaged. You will have opportunities with colleagues to lead on something that needs to be done, whether it's a new middle school or an environmental issue in your community that needs to be addressed because it's not only harmful to some citizens, but it's not very good for the image of the community to not be on top of it. Okay? So take seriously your responsibility. I'm not saying you all have to run for public office. If you do, fine. But it's very important. And the bottom line is, you can make a difference. You really can. It's tough to be on the local board. As I've always said to my students, if you're an elected school board member, your constituents can walk up to your business or your door any day they want. And most of us think we know as much or more than those who we elected to the county commission. The issues, it's not about an in-depth study on a tax issue or some legal controversial issue or foreign policy. It's about taking care of the streets. It's about programs that you have some understanding of, and consequently, it's tough. So if you had a problem and you organized an army behind you and went to the county commission, city, school board, you could have an impact. I'm serious about that. They would love to hear from somebody who had got their act together, who understood the topic as well as anybody, and had an army behind them that was nodding and engaged. You can make a real difference. Okay, now, what I was paid a tremendous salary to come here to do. We'll get to the topics. I want to share 3 experiences I had. The focus today is on conflicting values. When you're torn, you have a paper outline there of kind of setting the stage for various conflicts, or in a generic sense, that could help describe what we're talking about. The first one I want to share with you is, I take you back to when I was in the legislature. I came to Topeka in January of 1971. Now, I know that's a long time ago, and it is. But back in 1971, I was a newbie. Take you forward just a little bit. In my either second or third year there, I was still in the back row. Dairy farmer from Smolin, Kansas. We had an issue come up in the state where, for the first time, I think in general, certainly the first time it became a serious issue, was we had a beet crop in far western Kansas that required workers, farm workers. There was no machine that could harvest the crop. And for the first time, we had workers coming in. Cesar Chavez, historically speaking, for farm workers, is going to be remembered probably forever, focused in California, but he was coming to Kansas to get them organized. The farm groups, Farm Bureau, Farmers Union, etc., they were concerned, and rightfully so. We had no laws, nothing, no structure. So they got together and put a set of legislation together that showed how they had to register, the process, the steps, the approval, who they worked with in state government to be organized, okay? But they put in there a proviso that the workers could not strike during harvest. Now, having grown up with my background, that made just logical sense. I mean, if you let the workers strike, that was just kind of an obvious thing. I was not engaged, I wasn't a part of it, but I easily voted for it. Okay, it passed both houses of the legislature, it goes to Governor Docking. Governor Docking vetoed it. A Democrat with ties to organized labor was put, I'm sure, under a lot of political pressure to do so. He vetoed it. Okay, the process in the legislature can override that veto. But it requires a 2/3 vote in both houses, and that's not real easy, because that means both parties have to be a part of it in most cases. The Republican leadership came to me as a Democrat. Remember, I'm on the back row. And they say, we want you to lead the argument to override the veto. We want you to go down there to the well and make the motion to override your governor's veto of this legislation. Now, the conflict I obviously had came because of politics, because as soon as my minority leader, who I'd worked very closely with in my 2 years maybe plus, as a dairy farmer, I got up early. I was always in the Capitol very early. It was easy for me to be engaged and help go down to the Secretary of State's office and get the printed documents for the day and so forth. And so it allowed me to, and so he saw me as someone that might have a future. And he really reamed me out. He says, you don't even think about this. Don't even consider it. He says, if you want any future, you make that motion, you're dead. It's over with. And I kind of believed him. So my dilemma was, I was a farmer. I understood the issue of striking during a harvest. I also had been in the legislature 2 or 3 years and was kind of getting interested in politics in a more serious way. And I knew what Pete Locks, the minority leader from Wichita, was saying was probably true. So that was my dilemma. Do I stick with my background and my understanding of the issue? Or on the other hand, I was a member of the minority. Somebody in the majority, some Republican go down there and make that motion. It didn't have to be me. Now, we're going to have two votes here. One, I want to know how many of you, as an individual, not as a group, but as an individual, would have made the motion to override the veto from the governor. Okay, we won't do a count, and then how many of you would not? You'd have passed. You would have said, somebody else can do that. Okay. How many of you think I did make the motion? And how many of you, okay, you're alone. I did make the motion, and was very comfortable, but the end of the story is, obviously, I went on to fight another day successfully. So it was also a good lesson for me to stand up for what I really believed. The second experience I had that was very significant was I was governor. Now, the issue is the death penalty. As we've shared, I'd been in the legislature 8 years. Death penalty came up every session. Somebody would want to introduce it. We did not have a death penalty at that time. And a little bit of quick history. The last actually executing, I think we hung them, was a pair of gentlemen that killed the Clutter family out west. And you're nodding your head. It's one of those things you remember if you're in that part of the country. It gets passed down from one generation to another. Well, it was about the mid-50s. How many of you have read In Cold Blood? Okay. Truman Capote's. He spent a lot of time here going through that case, and a lot of time with the two men that had carried out the awful crime. Like I say, we had the death penalty then. Then after that, the courts declared it unconstitutional. So we went a long period of time without the death penalty. And when I got to the legislature, as I said a few moments ago, it was brought up every time. Now, I sat on the back row and kept the position through my entire career. I was not engaged in it. I voted against it. But I did not participate. I never once, even when I was in leadership, went down to the well to back up my opposition by trying to convert other folks, okay? It had, like I say, consistently for 8 years. I ran for governor in 1978 after 4 terms in the legislature voting against the death penalty. When I sat down with my political folks, we said, this is not an easy issue to deal with. It's a little closer now, but back then it was heavily pro-death penalty in the state. And, they were basically asking me, how are you going to deal with it? What are you going to say? And consistent with the fact that I didn't, have emotion behind it, it wasn't my cause, I decided for the campaign, and I felt comfortable saying it, that I would not support it, I would not propose it, but if the legislature, keeping in mind they turned it down year after year after year, if they would pass it, I would probably not sign it, but I would let it go into, the governor can let it go into law without the signature. You can sign it, veto it, or let it go into law without your signature. And I said that's what I would do. I could not bring myself to support it, but if the legislature in their wisdom decided, I would not be someone who would stand in the way. And I was comfortable saying that. very comfortable. I get elected, November of 1978. In January, I'm sworn in. 60 days later, approximately, it was early March, the legislature passes the death penalty. I mean, it was like, oh, what's going on here? The legislature didn't change that much, but something changed, and they passed it. Well, now, the way the structure is, when both houses have finally agreed, right down to every crossing the T, dotting the I, whatever, it goes next to the Secretary of State for enrollment. That takes a little bit of time. Gets to the governor's office. The governor has 10 days from the time it arrives in the office to where a decision has to be made. And my staff, we all knew what I was going to do. And so there was no discussion. I mean, back when I was governor, I had a great staff. Anything that would come to us that I had the deal signed with, we had a real intensive review. We had dialogue, sharing of information, ideas to decide what was the best decision. We didn't do that on the death penalty because they knew. And we had other bills coming, other work to be done. Now, as those 10 days went by, I gradually started thinking, it looks a little different when right there on my desk was the death penalty and my signature was going to impact the outcome of future lives. And maybe guilty and maybe not guilty. And so I started to look at it differently. And I was, I promised, I was publicly clear what my position would be if it came to my desk. And so the dilemma I had was, on the one hand, I had made a promise. On the other hand, as the 10 days went by, I was not just opposed, I was getting more strongly opposed. Because the first time in my life, I'd really thought about it. As I indicated earlier when I went through the legislature, I shared my thought. I wasn't engaged. I got involved in a lot of other issues, but not that one. But for the first time, and it was parallel to some degree with folks that are selected on a jury who raise their hand to the prosecutor and say, I support the death penalty. But then when they have somebody on the stand there, and they got to go into the room and sometimes it changes. So that was the conflict I had. Was I going to stick with the promise I made, or was I going to go where I was sort of headed and just take the consequences? I trust at this point you at least feel like I did have a tough decision to make. How many of you would have kept my promise and let it go into law without my signature? How many, if you were the governor without your signature? Okay, some of you were a little slow coming up. So how many of you would have vetoed it? Okay. How many of you think I vetoed it? Okay. Sharp class. Well, yeah, they probably have. Somebody might have had on the cell phone, they've checked my... I've done this several years and I haven't had a student yet that pulled that trick by quickly finding out what I actually did. I did veto it. I vetoed it 4 times. They'd bring it up every 2 years. Every time there was some new House members, they'd want to get them on the record for political reasons, and so it kept coming back. So I did it for 4 times. I felt comfortable. What was going to happen was going to happen. I was reelected. It was hardly an issue in the end, and so it worked out quite successfully for me to make that decision. The one thing I want to add very quickly, I feel even better today about the decision because I feel more strongly that the death penalty is wrong. But I put it in the context also today from a practical point of view. I don't know if any of you are from Wichita. The Carr brothers, sort of famous. They're still on death row. They committed their crimes before you were born, and it's still going. I think it's cruelty to the family's impact. Yes, to have lost a loved one. I'm not downplaying that at all. But to relive it year after year after year, that was 1995. I just think put them in prison, throwing the key away, treat them civilly, but, no chance they're going to do anything else is better. And then if you have made a mistake, if there is, and of course we're going through a period now where DNA is shifting some decisions that were made earlier. Now, we'll get beyond that, and I don't know what else will evolve, but I would still argue that mistakes will at some point, maybe fewer, will be made. Okay, moving on to topic number 3. And it's interesting to bring this up now because of the timing, what's going on in Congress, what has gone on in the legislature, which will be a big issue, I think, in the next governor's race. When I was governor, we had always done something about infrastructure, taking care of the highways, but it was kind of piecemeal, patch here and there to some degree. I felt like it needed to be more long range. We needed to look at a bigger picture. And it's one thing that has continued and been updated. And the current governor with the Republican legislature did re-up another 10 years. I don't know if it was in her first or second year as governor. It was an important issue for me. I thought it was significant, dramatic, and tough because we were going to raise taxes to fund it. And raising taxes is not easy to do, not easy to get the votes necessary to get it passed. Well, quickly, I want to share with you, to make this story realistic, is politics was different back then. Now, I'm a Democrat, and the Republicans and we disagreed on some things. And we would aggressively oppose each other, but we respected each other. And on that transportation bill, as well as many other things, I had more support from the Republicans than I did the Democrats. Okay, my transportation bill, one of my to-be's huge achievements, is going through the legislature. It's passed the House, it's passed the Senate committee, it's off general orders, it's final action. My sort of friend, I think most people thought we didn't like each other at all, the president of the Senate, Ross Doyne from Concordia, we were together on this issue. He's in the chair, final action, I'm in my office listening on the, I was about to say telephone, it wasn't the telephone, we did have a little technology in those days, so I could listen what they were doing. And 2020, 40 senators, 2020. Now, I trust, you're a smart group, instantly that's not good. You need one more vote. Because I have a president of the Senate who wants me to win. He wants to win for Kansas. He holds it. He holds it. He doesn't pick up the gavel. I suspect quite a few minutes go by. I can't remember exactly, but, and I'm just there crossing my fingers and hoping. The telephone rings. It's my friend Ross with the gavel. And he is one ticked off Republican. And when he shared with me what he did, I could understand why. He's, in very colorful language, he said, "Governor, those 20 for your bill, 16 are Republicans. I am not going to let a Republican change their vote. We've done our part and more. You've got to find one Democrat that'll change their vote. I'll give you 10 minutes. This is Ross speaking. And I knew he meant 10 minutes. So I have my Secretary of Economic Development sitting there with me, and we started, two obstacles. One, there was hardly anybody in the Senate Democratic caucus that I really knew. And secondly, people in a vote like that don't answer their phone. They know what's coming. If that phone rings and this vote is tied 20-20, somebody wants them to change their vote. So I had one senator who I'd served with in the House, Senator Billy McRae from Wichita, African American. We had been friendly, not close friends, but I felt comfortable making the call and just hoped and prayed that he would pick up the phone. He did. And I said, "Billy, what the hell is wrong? Wichita wants this. You have to know it's great for Kansas." And my friend said, "I understand. I don't disagree with you, Governor. But my photography business is not doing very well. I can't afford to not get reelected. I've got to win this." And the clock is moving. And at the same time we were working on this bill, we were working on a new department of what we called economic development. It's commerce today. The state had never had effort in economic development before. I felt like that needed to change, and we were working and making progress with the legislature. In fact, we had passed a kind of a structure, and we have in that structure a position for minority business development. So I look at Jamie, and what do we do? Do I live to fight another day on a program I've fought hard for, in which I can't be guaranteed that Senator Doyne is going to give me another chance, given how close and the situation and how few Democrats? Or do I offer Senator McRae a job? Buy his vote to get what I wanted done. Now, to be honest with you, there could be another battle down the road and another attempt, but it was right there, right in front of me. One more vote. Law. Improvements coming all across the state. Bridges, roads, asphalt, concrete, the whole spiel. And I had now down to a couple minutes. And so that's the dilemma I had. Do I buy that vote? Or do I accept defeat and come back and battle again and maybe succeed? Okay, How many of you would have offered Billy McRae the job? You know, I'm beginning to think that you don't have much respect for my values. Anyway, any of you would not have? Good. Oh, I didn't read that as well as I should. I apologize. I thought I almost saw all hands go up. How many of you think that I did offer the job now that I've sort of... Oh, really? Mr. President, did you have your hand up?
No.
Oh. How many of you that I live to fight another day? Okay, more even than I thought it might be. Well, Mr. McRae got a job. And I got the 21st vote I needed. And I'll be very honest with you. You know, that was one, I didn't have a lot of time to think about it, as I had shared. I was not raised that way. My mother would just, not good. And I just didn't operate that way. But it was like, you know, the greater good won out. The state needed it. You know, Republicans and some Democrats had come together to do something really good for the state. And I could not let it pass. And one, Billy's an African American. Two, the job was minority development. And three, he was qualified. He'd run a small business. He was basically intelligent and personable, and he would do a good job. Would he have got it after a national search? Maybe not. But for that moment, at a beginning when we were just starting the program, it made sense. Now, we got a few more minutes, and I want to quickly tell you about another experience. We won't go through the process, so don't worry about taking notes. But when Trish introduced me, she said I was the 8th archivist of the United States, which is, I think, pretty impressive because my BS was in dairy husbandry. All my predecessors with PhDs in history. And so it was kind of a shock when I became the archivist. We won't need to get into that, but I had a real dilemma in 2000. If you have a little background on political history, it was the presidential race between Al Gore and George W. Bush, and it was very, very close. We were in the middle of processing the Nixon tapes. Spent my entire 10 years with that issue, and we still weren't done when I left office. But we were right in the heart of it, supervised by a federal judge that had control of what we were doing in terms of scheduling and setting goals and objectives, okay? We were to have, in the year 2000, another release of records in August. Came up to that date and could not make it. We were not done. And so went back to the judge, and you know, it was basically, how soon can you do it? And we said basically October is the best we can do, and then that means you got to have that done in like the 7th of October, let's say. And so we accepted that. We went back. Okay, the presidential race is heating up. George W. Bush's father, Herbert Walker Bush, was very involved in the Nixon administration. Very, very involved. And that tape that we talk about was an automatic tape, noise activated in the White House for his entire time. It wasn't turned on like LBJ when he wanted to have a recording and not on when he didn't want. It was on. So the Bush campaign for president is sitting there and saying, holy crap, October they're going to release records? What do we know about our candidate's father? You know, did he not speak up when Nixon said something just totally embarrassing and so forth, which he was, you know, it happened. He was, well, don't need any details. he laid it out there in very colorful language and took some really extreme positions. He was very bright. He did a lot of good things as president. But they were just really nervous. And it turns out, by disluck or whatever, the person they sent was actively involved, was Jim Ciccone. He was vice president of AT&T at the time, and he had agreed to serve on my foundation and had been on my foundation for several years. So this powerful individual in a presidential race comes to me and said, John, you can't do it. You've got to delay it. You cannot be involved with deciding a presidential election. And of course, as it turned out, it was down to a handful of votes. If you remember, it was how the shads dropping from the pushing of the number 2 pencil down through, and how they interpreted if it was just hanging there, was a hanging shad a vote for that candidate, or was that vote, I mean, it was like intense in the end. So it turned out that we were talking something quite important politically. They said I had no choice. And, I said, well, I will respectfully think and I'll make a decision. But as I thought about it, I decided to go ahead and hold it. One, I had a federal judge. I don't know how I'd have dealt with that federal judge. He might have put me in jail for not following his federal order. And as it turned out, and the more I thought about it, I felt very comfortable. And I say that for this reason. If I had done it, if I had done what my friend Jim Ciccone wanted me to do, and somehow got the federal judge to give me till the middle of November, things get out in Washington what's going on. And as I reflected back, if the Gore campaign had got a hold of the fact that Carlin had delayed the release of these Nixon tapes till after the election, they would have had totally open things to go after. They could make things up. It must be something, they're trying to hide something. They pressured the archivist to keep from this release, because it was publicly known amongst historians at least that we were scheduled the next release in October. So it was one decision. I was under a lot of pressure, really torn, but I made the right decision, and it was the right decision for the Bush campaign as well, because as close as it was, the Gore campaign would have not had to stir up too much. And there was the potential for it. Because like I said, it was taping everything, and Herbert Walker Bush was in that office a lot. He was ambassador to China, he was CIA director, and obviously, for various reasons, heavily involved in his son campaign for president. And so I share that, making sure you know that 3 times in my experience things work. These conflicts come up. You may or may not be a future governor of Kansas, and I'm not ruling it out. This is an incredibly bright class, and a lot brighter than this one who had the success of being 2-time governor, I can assure you. My focus was on milking cows, pregnancy testing, all sorts of things that didn't contribute to my future very much. But you will have these conflicts, and you are potentially significant leaders, and those conflicts will come up in that part of your life. You'll have to make tough decisions, and where there's really 2 right answers in some ways, and have to make that decision. So just accept that. It's part of what goes with leadership. And our future is going to heavily depend upon your coming through and delivering. The other thing I would throw out there, and this is free of charge, I don't charge anything more. I have been incredibly lucky. And I could give you examples of just I mean, my life has happened because of things of, you know, I became Archbishop of the United States because I lost running for Congress in 1994. If I had won, they would have never even talked to me. Being Archbishop of the United States for 10 years was one of, I mean, I'm very proud of what we were able to do. I was smart enough to know I had to surround myself with talented people, and we did great things. But I could have missed that opportunity. If I hadn't run in 1968 for the legislature at the last minute and lost, I would never have been able to beat Gary Shearer from Salina, debate coach at Salina Central, who became lieutenant governor with Bill Graves. I couldn't have done it. Republican district, city district, I was this rural Democrat farmer, but I had had that losing experience and learned a lot. He had never run before, and I was able to win. And I could tell you several other things where it's just, and so you will have those, you know, I guess what I'm saying is don't let a setback, you know, maybe for a few minutes, a few hours, a couple days, but don't let it slow you down from being a success. You never know when it might be the door that opens for a great chance to really take your leadership skills and get the job done. And the last thing I would say, you are very impressive. I wish you the very best. The future depends on you and your colleagues that have the capacity to lead and make a real difference. We haven't had that. We've gone through generations where we just haven't had it. People didn't step up. You elected people and just kind of, you know, went on your way. It's got to be done differently. And so I'm counting on you as I think about my grandchildren, that you and the other peers are going to really make a difference. I appreciate this opportunity. I wish you the very best.